So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, greetings and salutations. It is the Women of BSV again with myself, Ruth, and our special guest is Marcin Zarakowski, who is the General Counsel and Chief of Staff at the Bitcoin Association, and he's based in Zug. And Marcin's speciality is law, which I admit I don't know enough about. So very glad to have you here, because I feel like this will be a nice educational session for at least myself, maybe even Ruth, and everybody else who's watching. So welcome to the Women of BSV, Marcin, and I hope
Thank you, and happy to be here.
Marvelous, that's good. I like it when people are happy to be here. So,
especially given the meadow and the background, yes.
Yeah, you just showed us the meadow, didn't you? You perhaps, I should flash it for the viewers.
And the flowers behind Ruth also, right?
Yes,
yeah, but they're fake. They're always there.
So, Marcin, do you want to give us a bit of a background of like yourself, where you're from, and what got you interested in law in the first place, and then specifically blockchain law?
Sure. So I'm originally Polish, born and raised in Poland. I also studied in the law school in Poland. So I specialize in Polish law. I completed the bar training and admitted to the bar in Poland. I'm an attorney at law. After I left law school, I worked for different international companies, international law firms, where I specialize in intellectual property law, IT law, data protection. So already I had some exposure to new technologies. I work with many patent attorneys, so like knowledge experts, scientists, technicians that were constructing different things and designing different things and developing different inventions. So that already allowed me to see how the whole process of creating things that may change the world happen. And this already involves a lot of different legal issues with patenting, with protecting the rights of the inventors. And in 2017, late 2017, early 2018, I was really interested in blockchain technology, and I started thinking like how the law, the existing legal, the regulations and applicable laws, how they address Bitcoin, blockchain technology, different crypto assets, what these actually are in the eyes of law. Mm-hmm. And at that time, together with my wife, we decided to move to Switzerland, Zug, which, pure coincidence, appeared to be the heart of the so-called crypto valley, where all the blockchain projects, all blockchain companies were setting up their businesses, their operations, Ethereum Foundation being the first one in 2014, and then many other followed. So I was in the epicenter, the best place to be if you were interested in blockchain. And it was still, and I think still is, a field where law, at least in some aspects, needs to keep up. The regulators need to keep up. So it was also a perfect moment to enter the space, because there were no other people, or maybe a few, that had enough expertise that were experienced in the addressing legal aspects of blockchain technology. So it was also thrilling, joining a space and being this kind of a discoverer, and then being a part of something where things are actually created, and being able to consult different governments and different international organizations on how to address blockchain from the legal side. So I joined one of the blockchain foundations based here in Zug. It was Lisk Foundation, a not-for-profit that was supposed to, that still is, supporting the Lisk protocol, another layer 1 protocol for decentralized applications, a kind of a competitor to what we do right now with BSV. I worked there as a legal counsel, in-house counsel. I was responsible for a whole variety of legal matters, starting with, just corporate governance, contracts, that everyday job of any lawyer that works for any entity. But then, also the blockchain element and what crypto assets really are, what the native token of the Lisp protocol really was, how it should be addressed, what's the payment token, security token. And this was the moment when, at least here in Switzerland, the regulators and the supervisory authority started to address it publicly. They released some guidance, hence the popularity of Switzerland, not because of very relaxed regulatory regime, but because of the clarity. That's why people and all the blockchain companies and they are still choosing Switzerland for the blockchain businesses, as I said, not because of the favorable regulatory environment, but because of the clarity. And it's kind of it's just the more companies you have, the easier it is for the new ones to join, because there is a real ecosystem, and you have for example, tax office that has already faced hundreds of financial statements and tax, let's say, documents that document exposure to crypto assets. So a tax office here in Zug in Switzerland, they know how to address it, how to calculate it, what it is. Whereas I think in Poland, if you have a company that has some digital assets in their balance sheet, there might be some questions what these are, how you should treat them. So it's easier here to do business. You're able actually to pay some of the invoices and payments to service providers in crypto assets. You can pay, for office space. You can pay for lawyers. You can pay for accounting. That's why I think it's just when this critical mass was passed, you really have an ecosystem. And I worked at the Lisp Foundation for 2.5 years, and then I think in April or March last year, I decided to join Bitcoin Association for BSV, also based in Zug and headquartered in Zug. And I've been there ever since. And I also joined as a legal counsel and director of public policy management. But very quickly, I've been involved in operational issues with business management, like with actually forming and transforming Bitcoin Association in what it is right now. And I'm also happy to discuss this with you. I know that you had Patrick Prince, the managing director, as one of the guests of your previous episodes. So I don't want to disappoint you, but I'm doing less and less legal work right now. I'm more involved in the operations, and hence my second title, Chief of Staff, to somehow formalize my role in Bitcoin Association, which is going a little bit beyond being a legal counsel.
So, I mean, it's fascinating, to be fair. And the fact that Switzerland is kind of paving the way for everybody else in the world of how to actually go about using blockchain technology within that legal framework as well. And like you said, they're paying tax and paying people as well.
Yeah, with the tax, actually, you are allowed to pay in tax up to a certain threshold. In Zug, you can pay that in Bitcoin and I think in Ether. The thing is that there is nothing spectacular behind it, because in the back end, it's still being run in a regular way. You just have a service provider, Bitcoin Swiss, that provides a gateway. So you're paying in Bitcoin, but it is immediately liquidated into Swiss francs. So there is no rocket science. The actual taxes are not paid in Bitcoin, right? For you, it may look like, but the local tax office, the tax authorities, they do not hold Bitcoin in the balance sheet.
And maybe that's a good thing. I don't know, because if they started to have one asset or another, it might be a problem.
Yeah. The other thing is, given the fact that this whole ecosystem has been expanding since 2015 and 16, there are more and more people working in the business, and some of them, depending on the projects, were actually offered their salary in crypto assets. Right? And I think here the labor law here in Switzerland, if they were actually employees, not just contractors, is quite clear that the volatility risks cannot be put on the employee, which means that yes, you can pay. The employee can be paid in crypto assets, BSV, BTC, you name it, but the actual salary has to be set in the fiat currency. So let's say my salary is 5,000 Swiss francs, and I agree that I'm fine with that being paid in BSV, right? But I will always receive, at least at the date when my salary is being paid, I will always receive the equivalent of 5,000 Swiss francs. So
Which
this
is
is
no
possible.
bad thing lately, right? Because if
Yep.
you specified an amount in BSV, then you'd be significantly worse off right now.
For example, yes. But there's the risk, right? One may also argue that you can also gain extremely a lot, right? Given the volatility, but this cannot be put on the employee.
Well, to be fair, I mean, recently that's happened with fiat anyway, especially with, say, like the US dollar and the pound. I mean, it has been quite, fluctuating quite a lot recently. So we can see that there as well in that respect. So in the future, though, I mean, it does, like I say, it does set a precedence for how things could be set up. You can, for other companies in different jurisdictions. Talk about jurisdiction. We've got, like, say, for example, we were talking earlier about patents and jurisdiction and how long, like, if you file a patent, how long does that patent last? Is it a period of 12 months, 5 years, 10 years, or can you choose? And does that apply to every jurisdiction?
So patent laws are like a right resulting from a patent is incrementally associated with one particular jurisdiction. Although there is but with patents, although there is a so-called European Patent Convention and there is a European patent law, it doesn't mean that once you apply to European Patent Office for European patent, it means that once you receive it, you have a right that is valid in the whole, let's say, European Union or countries that are adhere to the convention. With trademarks, this is the way, right? Like you have one right that is valid throughout the whole EU if you have European trademark. But with patents, you have a kind of a string of different patent rights in all the different jurisdictions. So they are always valid for one particular jurisdiction. If you seek a patent protection in the UK, you will only receive patent protection in the UK. The length of the patent protection, I think, depends on the country. However, there is a standard, and please, I mean, don't quote me, but I think 90% of the countries actually provide patent protections for 20 years. Okay. However, and the time, and this period is being calculated from the moment when patent application is filed. And this is quite interesting because the whole process of granting a patent might take up to several years because, you're filing a patent application, it has to be first technically reviewed. Then you may need to do some corrections, and then it's being like substantially reviewed. Actually, the people, the patent experts in the patent office are verifying if there is an inventive step, if it's novel, and they just see if actually something is patentable per se, and then they grant the patent. So you may receive a patent after 5 years, and this 5 years is already like gone from your patent protection.
Yeah.
But then you'd end up with 15 years worth of patent instead of 20 years of patent. Then. Okay.
Yes, that's correct. But the way the patent protection works, you have certain, let's say, conditions that need to be met by invention in order to be patentable. One of them is that it has to be novel, which means that even if you discovered something that is novel, like no one has ever thought about that, like you have a solution to a certain problem, technical solution, but you just shared it here today during this podcast. You've basically just erased the novelty of your solution from that moment onwards, which means that if you as a party that wants to protect your invention, you're filing your patent in one jurisdiction. The moment when this patent application becomes public, which is usually after 6 or 12 months, if you're just interested in protecting it, not necessarily enforcing it against others, from that moment onwards, you can be sure that no one will be able to patent this in any other place in the world.
Okay. Right.
Because it will not be novel anymore. Because if there is another patent application filed, let's say after a year in the US, either you yourself, or usually it should be done automatically by the patent office when they screen what is the current state of the art. They say, oh, but Didi published something like this, released it, and even sought patent protection in the UK in 2021. However, if you want to have like active patent protection, you want to enforce it, then you would also need to seek patent protection in the US and all the jurisdictions where you would like to enforce your patent rights. This is the way, like in a nutshell, how patents work.
That's so interesting. Okay. So you do protection right from day one, in that nobody else can do a counter patent somewhere else.
Yes. So you're by like kind of the moment when you file a patent application, even though it's still it's not public for the 6 or 12 months, depending on the jurisdictions, until the patent office makes it publicly available for anyone to see. Like, look, this is the patent application that was filed a year ago by Lily. And from that moment onwards, anything that appeared after will no longer be novel in comparison to that invention, because that's already part of the state of the art. Which is
presumably why Craig was onto it so fast out the gate, patenting left, right, and center.
So what Craig is saying, if you're referring to what he said during his speech during the Global Blockchain Convention in Dubai, when he was referring to Ethereum, and I think...
oh yeah, he might enforce something.
Yes, he said, patents are being granted right now, although the same patents were filed in 2015, right? But it took so long for the patent to be granted. But the protection is like valid ex ante from that moment onwards, right, when it was filed. So he's able to enforce it upon if there are merits, right? I haven't investigated that. I'm not a patent expert. It's very technical. But if there are merits, he would be able to enforce it from the moment when his patent protection was granted, and against anyone else that afterwards was using solution that is using the invention that he protected.
So what's the difference between patents and intellectual property?
Well, intellectual property is, I would say, a catch-all term. So patents are just specific rights that are part of the broader category of intellectual property. Intellectual property is, I can list elements of that. You have copyrights, right? You have patents, you have trademarks, you have designs, right? Design are also protected. You have also utility. I don't know what's the English translation of it, but there is something in between, something like the protection is lesser than with patents, but it's valid for a shorter time. It's easier to get it, but it's not subject to patentability. Its utility works. I'm not sure if this is the term. So you have these different categories of rights where laws provide you protection for your work, from your creativity as a creator, inventor, writer, artist, designer, developer. So you are incentivized to create things because you know that you will still be able to benefit. You will have a monopoly on benefiting from the results of your work for a while. Yes, for a while. For a while. But usually it also means that you need to be kind of public and open about it. So it's still the broader, let's say, the broader public, let's say, even more humankind, can still benefit from your work by being inspired to see what's possible. They cannot copycat what you do. They cannot use per se your invention or your design, but your work is also like it's done to the benefit of the broader humankind, right? That's why, that's why let's say we go forward as a humankind, like why we develop.
So does that still apply though? Say, you, like you said earlier about you have an idea and you say it on a podcast, or you write it down and then you send it to somebody, and that's not being, you've got an actual physical kind of evidence that you've written this down and somebody else has seen it. Is that a kind of protection? Because I know I used to be under the impression with IP you could actually put it in an envelope, seal it, and then send it to yourself. And then does that still apply?
That's with copyrights, because you can write a poem, put it in a drawer, and like wait 20 years, and from that moment when you wrote it, you had copyrights to this poem, right? The thing is that it might be really hard how to prove it before the court. how would you prove it that exactly 20 years ago, on the 21st of September 2002, you wrote this particular poem, and then that someone wrote it afterwards was actually second, and he might have infringed. It might be, your friend that was in your home, and he opened the drawer and he read the poem, and then he copied it and published it. You might have problems with providing enough evidence. However, this idea of actually sending it to yourself is one of the options how you can provide a kind of a timestamp. Hence, when I started to be interested in blockchain technology, when I heard of it, apart from this very narrow use case, which is digital payments, I realized that blockchain technology provides for way more utility, way more use cases. The first idea I had, because I was involved in many patent litigations, trademark litigations, copyright infringements, I thought that actually is a good idea. If you timestamp, you put your work, you put it on the blockchain, especially if it's a written work, right? You put it on the blockchain, it's timestamped. You're the one that has private key. So you can still keep it kind of secrecy, even if you hash it, or it's up to you how you can. But then you can provide reliable evidence.
Yeah, I was thinking it's great for musicians. The reason I was asking is because there was a big case with Robbie Williams with Angels. And a lot of people know about that because apparently he stole that from somebody else, like most of the lyrics, etc. So, as you say, this would be one way for a musician or an author to be able to protect their works, is to actually have it time stamped onto the blockchain, and therefore the legal side is the legal aspect is kind of covered because of that timestamp.
Yes, that will be one of the options. I assume I think I've heard about the case, but I know so much details about it. But if I assume the one that actually was seeking damages from Robbie Williams, was probably like a little bit less known artist.
Yeah.
So it must have been harder for that artist to prove, yes, I was the first one. Here's all the concerts. You have recordings on all the concerts when I was playing the song 10 years before Robbie Williams, right? But if this is the case, if he stored the lyrics, the soundtrack, right, on the blockchain, or somehow hashed it and they had the hash pointer stored on the blockchain, it would have been way easier for him to prove it before the court.
So going forwards, basically, we've got the perfect tool for.
Yes, it is. I know that the European EU Intellectual Property Office, which is the office that grants trademarks, and that is also tried of kind of coordinating some of the efforts in fighting counterfeits and IP infringements at the EU level. They've been experimenting with using blockchain technology. I don't know the details, but I've seen that they've been experimenting with blockchain technology, at least with fighting counterfeits, providing kind of a record of original, genuine products. Yeah. One of the ideas is I also was involved in many cases where so-called I forgot the term, but there when you look about luxury brands, for example, think about perfumes, right? So let's take an example of a company that is manufacturing luxury perfumes with brands like Hugo Boss, Lacoste, you name it. For you to consider a product, let's say a bottle of perfume a luxury, it has to be also its pricing has to be above a certain level. Like you wouldn't think of a Hugo Boss perfumes as luxury product if they would cost £5. That's my assumption, right?
Yeah.
But the threshold to consider something as a luxury product will be completely different in a developing country. Let's say, for example, Vietnam. Yeah. But there is still a market. You still have people that would like to buy these products, and it's quite a significant market. So what these brands do, they sell the same product with the same qualities that is priced differently in the UK, in Peru, in Vietnam, in Russia, right? So, and it's a genuine product. These are not counterfeits. They have the same, say, properties and so on. So it's very easy to figure it out that there are people that are actually buying those genuine products in those jurisdictions, those regions where they are cheaper. They're transporting them to other jurisdictions like UK, Germany, US, and they are selling them below the official price, right? So they are still very competitive, but it's still above the price that they paid in those jurisdictions when they initially bought them. And I mean, do they do anything wrong? I mean, they are selling genuine products. Like, where's the problem?
Depends how they got across the border, probably. But yeah.
Here comes the regulations. Like every trademark regulation in every jurisdiction is saying that if you are a trademark holder, like I'm a Hugo Boss, right? And I'm the owner of the trademark of Hugo Boss, and I allow to put it on the bottle of perfumes. I decide in which jurisdiction this particular bottle can be sold.
Right.
And so these bottles, these manufacturers are aware of this. What they do, they put different, serial numbers, different indications on, the packaging and the bottle. So when you buy this bottle of Hugo Boss perfumes in the UK, you can easily, if you have this serial numbers, you can easily verify if you are a manufacturer or if you're Hugo Boss. You can verify if this is a product that was intended for the UK or if it was intended for other jurisdiction. And if it wasn't, then there is clear infringement of your rights because it is against what you agreed upon, and you can seek protection. The problem here, however, is like, how do you prove this? How me and you, how we can know? We just see these numbers, and how am I able to verify myself? And then even the seller, someone that has a store and is buying it from a wholesaler, a whole dispatch of Hugo Boss perfumes. How that person can verify if he's buying original? I mean, still original, but like that was intended for the UK market or the Vietnam. They are the same. They're genuine products. So here is really, really tricky question. And if you imagine that all this data can be put on the blockchain, and the company can provide verifiable evidence by basically pointing out and saying, look, this article was intended to be sold only in Vietnam, not in the UK. And you can track everything that happened with this bottle because all the records were on the way from the moment when it was manufactured to the moment it was sold, and it's available in the register. Your honor, you can check it.
So in that regard as well, in that regard, it would be the seller who is actually breaking jurisdiction laws and not the buyer.
Not the buyer. Like everyone who's like in the chain of selling the product. But the problem is that the longer you are, the further you are from the actual perpetrator of the one that transports it from different market, the lesser the chance that you are even aware of that you are selling something that's not intended for your market, but it was intended for Vietnam, Peru, or even Australia, right? And if there are court cases initiated, that usually the trademark holder, Hugo Boss, will sue you as a seller and saying, hey, you're selling products and you're infringing my rights. And then you would say, well, how could I know? And Hugo Boss will say, look, there is this register, it's publicly available. All you had to do was just take the number, maybe from one sample, put it in the register, and you could verify. One can argue that it's still possible today. You can contact Hugo Boss, probably if you send them an email and you will send them the number, they will still provide you an answer. The problem is that they can manipulate. Like, what guarantee do you have that Hugo Boss will not manipulate your database just to make you liable and say, okay, it was actually for UK, but I'm going to change it for Vietnam. And this is what courts started. I mean, we are usually representing the brands, those brands that are going after the sellers. This is what we've witnessed. Some of the courts were saying how this seller could know that he's not selling the product admitted to the UK, but it was admitted to other market. So my idea was, why Hugo Boss is not going to put all this data on the blockchain, timestamp, then when it comes to the trial, it's so easy to provide evidence and proof that nothing has been manipulated.
Wonderful. And is that what like Seafood Chain are doing? Did he?
Yes, you could basically what Seafood Chain is doing. They're also like recording different stages of a product. So you could do the same, like with when there is when these perfumes are being produced, when they leave the factory, when they leave the warehouse, when they are transported to another warehouse, when they are even crossing a border. everything, all of that can be recorded on chain. And, obviously there's only one chain that can sustain so many transactions and so efficient. And it's only one chain that you can store this data in an affordable way. And it's BSV, right? So it wouldn't even make sense for to do it in another chain.
So with regards to the perfume, because that's quite easy for people to understand, because it comes in packaging. So are they required though legally though now, if they're going to store everything on the blockchain with a timestamp, it needs to be on the packaging that this is also the case, because they do have kind of not to be sold in wherever or whatever.
Yeah.
But is there going to be something that they specifically now need to do with the packaging side of things?
What I remember still from my practice, I cannot give you the actual details of the case, but these parties that are dealing with those perfumes, they are importing them from other jurisdictions. What they do, they are sometimes they are providing additional packaging, so they are strapping off all the think of it. I know that in many countries in the EU, maybe also in the UK, you have this online resellers of perfumes that are very cheaper, a lot cheaper than the same perfumes if you could buy them in the brick and mortar store. The question is are they counterfeit? Not necessarily. They might be real ones, but they usually come from this kind of an import scheme. And what they do, just please check on whoever is going to listen to us. I checked it myself. I bought the bottle from one of those online resellers, and then when I took the packaging, it was all in foil and originally genuinely packed. But then the serial code was just cut out. This is what they do. But the manufacturers, they are using additional, let's say, marking that is not so easily visible. Some of them are visible only in UV light, for example. There are some other markings, and an ideal and perfect scenario would be to use.
The Mikey uses, and Kevin, they put it in the near field, whatever it is.
Oh yeah,
RFID or whatever it is.
RFID, yes, I wanted to say that. The best option would be if you have RFID. So this kind of a very small, I'm not sure if I call it correctly, like a chip, right? That stores certain data. And if this one, that's usually when you're buying clothes in the store, you need to, the seller needs to just pass it through their desk to just deactivate the RFID, so it's not pinging when you're leaving the store. So this one is storing certain data, and if this data would be then also somehow stored in the blockchain, and RFID has to be attached to a product. If it's not, then it's just an assumption that it's a fake product. This would make the whole life easier. Obviously, this will add additional costs to manufacturing because this RFID costs a bit. But maybe for luxury brands, if the price of a bottle of perfume is 50 or 100 pounds, this is not much of a difference, right? But it provides additional benefits.
I've seen them RFIDing packs of meat nowadays.
You see.
Yeah, we've gotten to that point already.
But I don't think they are storing the data on the blockchain. Probably they are still using on the local databases or cloud or whatever.
But it's a good use for it. I can see.
Yeah. I mean, especially that you said high-end fashion brands. I think Gucci were kind of using something or somebody like that anyway. But yeah, I mean, for them, it's going to be very useful.
And it's not even luxury products. Also, one brand of headphones, like wireless headphones. When you are buying, a headphone set for £100, they've been also facing the same problem that they're selling the same products cheaper in other jurisdictions, or manufacturers of ink cartridges to printers and Xerox machines and stuff. They also, this is also a big problem because for you to print, you're able to afford it or willing to pay a certain price, but people still need to print in developing countries, and if you charge the same that you're changing in the UK, no one will be using the services, right? So they're also facing these problems. I think it's especially in the globalized world, it's a very common problem if you have a brand that is operating globally.
Fascinating, gosh. Yeah, no, it's a massive use, probably the best use for blockchain that there is, really. It's surprising we haven't had that many companies capitalizing on it yet.
If there's anyone that's listening to us and wants to develop this idea, please at least give me some credits.
I mean, how do people? I mean, how do people get in touch with you if they really wanted to get in touch with you? I mean, are you just email you?
Oh yeah, sure. Look, so I think my email address is available on the BA's website. That's one thing, and second, you can also drop me a message on LinkedIn. What I'm also encouraging everyone to do? BA launched a Discord channel a couple of months ago. I'm also there. I think I'm one of the moderators or admins. So you can also drop a message over there, and this will certainly pass to me if I'm not paying attention. So this is another way, and I encourage everyone to join Discord channel. I think we have almost 3,000 users right now, and it's been growing given the fact that it's been just a couple of months.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, really good, because then that means you are easily accessible then for anybody that does have any legal questions, and you can answer or help answer them, or any questions about the BA then. So there is another element that you touched on, which is AML and KYC. What's the difference between AML to KYC?
Okay, so the abbreviation comes from like KYC is like know your customer. This is more of the name for the process that banks and like financial intermediaries needs to undertake. So when they onboard you as a client, they need to verify your identity, so they can know their customer, like a KYC, know your customer. Whereas AML,
can I just say this really quickly?
Sure.
Craig Wright in his trial at the minute, it's in Norway, isn't it? I got that right.
Right, I guess.
Yeah, he's insisting that he be identified by the people who know him, which of course is what you have to do when you get a passport. It's like literal people attesting to the fact that they know who you are and you are who you say you are. So I think that's really interesting, because he's doing it in the way that banks do it, that passport checks do it, and it is the way it's done. It's not through keys, not your keys, not your coins nonsense. So it's a bit difficult at the moment. Carry on. AML.
Yeah. So KYC is like the name of the process that the banks and financial intermediaries are doing, and they do it because of the AML regulations. This is what they are required to do. AML, anti-money laundering regulations. So every country in the world, I assume, is kind of somehow obliged to have anti-money laundering regulations to also to counterfeit financing terrorism. They are usually put in this one bucket, and they're called AML. In some jurisdictions, the regulations are stricter and harsher, and others like more relaxed. That's why some countries and some projects, some people try to arbitrage. They move from one jurisdiction to another, and it's not necessarily only about the law itself. It's also how it's enforced, right? So you may have really hard, strict law, but if the supervisory authority that is supposed to enforce them is not very effective, or intentionally is not effective, then the law is not put into action. So what anti-money laundering law, I assume you're asking in the context of crypto assets.
Yep.
Okay, so we have this, as I said, every country in the world is somehow obliged to have these regulations. And the reason I said obliged, and I put it kind of quotation marks, is obviously there is no one international government that is like telling you have to do it this or that. Nevertheless, we have international organizations. And there is one that is called Financial Action Task Force, FATF. And it's grouping most developed countries, but also like G8 group and all the powerful economies of the world, and they set standards. So they gather together like every 6 months, and they review the existing standards applicable to fighting money laundering globally, because it's very cross-border. You cannot really fight money laundering if you just have regulations in one country. You need to do it internationally. Mm-hmm. And they issue standards, and obviously once digital assets. And another thing, what FATF and many of the anti-money laundering regulations are referring to they are referring to virtual assets. It's another term. And virtual assets is something broader than crypto assets, because they also involve all these assets that you can, trade in different games, right? They don't necessarily have to be blockchain based, right? But so it's a broader term, but crypto assets fall into that category. So I think from 2016, 17, as the market for crypto assets started to grow, there were different crypto exchanges. People realized that these assets may be used to bypass banking system and the banking system that was already trying to apply regulations that are fighting on money laundering. So it was just a loophole that was explored by list actors. So this international organization, FATF, started to address this, and they started issuing first guidance. They found out the working group, and I think they really did a lot in that field in the last 2 years. They coined a term of virtual asset service provider to very in a nutshell, and I know I'm oversimplifying the thing. It's like whatever it's every entity that has anything to do with virtual assets, whether it's a crypto exchange that obviously has a lot to do with the assets, but also some of the wallet providers, or even if you as a service provider, I don't know, you accept payments in crypto, you are virtual asset service provider. And this organization is saying that it's recommending as a standard to all the countries around the world to adopt regulations that require those virtual asset service providers, so anyone that is dealing with virtual assets, to do certain things, right? To do this KYC, right? To identify the owner of the assets, the source of the assets, and so on. And depending on the importance of the party, also to have to report that to the supervisory authority, employ a compliance officer, and so on and so forth. So AML is a really big thing in the field of crypto assets. It's I think is the most tangible international regulatory regime on the international level, even though it differs in different jurisdictions, but still there is the standard that is applicable to digital assets at this stage. And it's very tangible because if as I said, if you do business with virtual assets, you need to observe what this FATF, this international organization, is saying, because either your local jurisdiction has already adopted that into the law, or it will have to be done quite soon, and it will affect your business. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And something that also they did, they introduced so-called travel rule. That started a lot of discussion, I think, a year ago in the US. What the travel rule is, it's a requirement for this virtual asset service provider to attach additional data to a crypto payment. Right now, if I'm sending you one BSV, all you know is like the wallet address of the sender, probably the amount. You can track the history, right, of like from where they got the coins, just by analyzing UTXOs, and to the let's say to the original Coinbase string when the coins were mined. This is what you are able to do. But if I was acting with caution, you will not be able to find any other information about myself. You will not be able to identify what are my credentials, where I'm based. And these information are usually required under anti-money laundering regulations. When you are sending a money transfer, you're required to provide a name of the receiver, right? Sometimes it's address also. And if there is a payment above certain value, above certain threshold, you may be also required by the bank to provide additional information. On the other hand, the bank already knows information about yourself, right? They know your address, they have even scan of your passport, or they verified your identity. So these informations are already in the system, and it's traveling through a SWIFT system along with the payment itself. So any actor on the way, different banks that are involved in your sending international transfer, they're able to verify the source and the beneficiary of the transactions. With Bitcoin, you don't really have that. Nevertheless, you can attach this information, but you need additional, let's say, layer protocol. You can attach certain information into the transaction. The question is how verifiable it is. So travel rule is this concept coined by the FATF that is going to be and slowly being introduced by the anti-money laundering regulations around the world Just basically copy whatever is already happening and applicable to money transfer, regular money transfers, into the crypto world. Obviously, there are many people that are opposing this, that would like Bitcoin and would like to have to either blockchain and cryptocurrencies to be still kind of pseudonymous, anonymous, and complying with this is doing the opposite.
But this is where Craig always says that law is law and code is not law, because law is law.
Yeah, I mean, in the end, what's Bitcoin or what, if we go even further, what blockchain really is just a ledger, right? It's just a mean of storing data.
Cool.
And it's a very specific database. Just by the pure fact that you created a new database, new way of storing data in a very specific way, does it mean that it actually puts it outside of the legal order? I don't think so, right? So the AML regulation should still apply. The problem is obviously in the actual implementation, so how to do it in an efficient way and so on. But I totally agree with this, that the emergence of Bitcoin and then further on the other blockchains, this has not changed anything. The laws still apply.
Still apply, yeah.
And is there a threshold beneath which you don't need to do KYC? Is it like?
I know there are, but it's very individual. No, I'm not 100% certain. I know that there are specific thresholds introduced in these recommendations of FATF applicable to virtual assets. I think that if there is more than $1,000, 1,000 euros, 1,000 Swiss francs, if the transaction is worth more, then you need to comply. I'm not sure how it's actually calculated. What if you're just sending like 5 transactions in a span of a week? I don't know if it's just accumulated value of the transactions within a specific time frame. I don't know, but there are thresholds.
You could do hundreds of transactions in a day that were all for small amounts and separate, and it wouldn't be that difficult to do it. So yeah, I get you.
But these thresholds are already existing in different IML regulations and different jurisdictions applicable to fiat payments. I think there are requirements that you are not allowed to to pay, or another way, I'll put it the other way. So a service provider or a seller is not allowed to accept a payment in cash over certain threshold. This is, I think it's in the EU, and some countries can do it harsher. I know that in Spain it's like 5,000 or 10,000 euros, so you're not allowed to pay someone in cash for his service or for his product when it's worth more than 10K. It has to be done through a money transfer or by card or doing the digital, let's say, means of payment, because then it's immediately entering, right, the systems of the banks that are subject to regulations. So again, nothing really changes, right?
Yeah. So I also see here on your Bitcoin Association little blurb about you that you are an expert panel of the EU Blockchain Observatory and Forum. What do they do?
So that was that was a think tank that was that is backed by the European Commission. I think it was initially founded in 2017 and 18, when the EU authorities quickly realized that blockchain and crypto assets are here to stay. And exactly. So what they did first, they established. Obviously, they were doing a lot of work. Let's say, kind of in this internally, trying to assess the importance of different issues. But they wanted to create a forum to engage different experts that are involved in the blockchain field. So this is one thing that what they did. They created this EU blockchain observatory and forum as a kind of a think tank. This entity is issuing different reports, organizing different conferences, webinars to educate also about blockchain. And I think EU officials and members of parliament, people that work for EU institutions, are very often taking part in those and are sourcing the knowledge about blockchain from over there. There was another element another activity that was backed by the EU Commission was founding an association, International Association of Trusted Blockchain Applications, INATBA in short. It was an association that was supposed to group these people, but also these projects that are already building something on BSV, on blockchain, BSV, wishful thinking, but on using blockchain technology, but also established companies, large corporations that are either implementing solutions, blockchain-based solutions, or are considering to do so. So really huge corporations, banks, the same with startups, and lawyers, and so very broad category of members. And this was founded in 2019, and EU just wanted to have a counterparty with whom they can consult different, legislative initiatives. They can talk to as an industry organization. And I was one of the founding members of that, representing back then LISC, and I was quite active for 2.5 years, being part of the privacy working group. So a working group that was dealing with how data protection regulations and blockchain, how they can live together, how just assessing this intersection, which is also very interesting, right? Because one of the incremental values, at least in the public perception, is the immutability of blockchain, right? And then if we put it in the context of the new data protection regulations, specifically GDPR, which grants data subjects a right to be forgotten, how do you actually enforce this right on a ledger that is immutable? Like if your data is being put on the blockchain, it's supposed to stay there forever. How do you erase that, right? And then even the fact that the GDPR was, and then the works on GDPR started somewhere in 2013-14. So before blockchain was actually something that people talked about. Obviously, Bitcoin existed, but people were not thinking that much about this cutting-edge technology. So the way GDPR is designed, it always seeks for one central entity as a data controller, right? This entity that's collecting your data that might be liable if something happens to this data, but against which you can also enforce your rights as data subjects. And you will contact data controller, the airline that is collecting your personal data when you buy a ticket. You can just contact them and say, please erase my data because I don't want to be in your database. What would you do with blockchain, which is a distributed, kind of a network with different nodes? Who is the data controller? Like, is there one entity that can act like this? Second, there is a concept of joint data controllers, like when you have many parties that have these rights of controlling the data. But are miners in the Bitcoin network actually these entities that can be liable? What they do is just they process transactions. There is nothing they can do. I mean, they are not even storing the data. It's someone else, like us. I can store Didi's or Ruth's data and put it in the blockchain. And why miners should be liable for this? So the whole DLTs were completely out of the scope of GDPR when GDPR was designed. Nevertheless, GDPR is still applicable. So I think this is one of the issues that, at least at the EU level, is stopping the adoption of blockchain technology, because large corporations, and not even them, but in general, they're afraid of using the technology that involves storing personal data. And when you think about that, almost every use case for blockchain, in this way or another, involves personal data. Because the term of personal data is very broad. It can be anything that can lead to identification of a data subject. Even if data is pseudonymous, like a wallet address, if I add additional data to your wallet address because I can track your transactions, I saw that you were paying for coffee in this particular cafe using Bitcoin, and then you were paying for a ticket for a train that goes from your city to another city, and I just aggregate all the data. I can narrow the scope to basically only one person. That would be you, only based on the information that for me was just a string of numbers and letters. So these wallet addresses are pseudonymous data. They're not anonymous.
So do you think they will?
Data protection regulations can do with that, and it's still very much unclear. There are no court judgments. There's no case law applicable to that. Yeah.
Okay. So there's probably no chance of the GDPR rules changing in the future, or do you think they might have to, just to, because I mean, like you say, there is this, the privacy laws and the right to be forgotten kind of stuff as well. So it's a difficult one, isn't it?
It depends. So obviously, the devil is in the details, because the right to be forgotten not necessarily means that you need to erase the data. You need to make it inaccessible. So the whole right, the whole right to be forgotten was established in the EU and the EU legal order as a result of the court case when a person sued Google because that person requested Google that a particular image of that person should be deleted from the Google searches. And what Google said, like, look, what we do, we are a search engine. These images are actually, stored and used on different websites that we do not control.
Yeah.
Well, the court said, look, Google, yes, we understand, but if you make it impossible to search for those pictures in the search engine, no one else using Google will be able to find them in the search results. So, like, putting the same, like, per analogium to blockchain, right? If you don't have to delete the data, but if you make it somehow inaccessible, it will still, the right to be forgotten will still be satisfied, right? But again, devil is in the details.
I was going to say, because you might have different pieces of software that are continuing to access it. Let's say you've got like a Twitch interface, and you flag a tweet, Twitch, whatever, as being deleted. So maybe the Twitch interface doesn't show you that tweet, but maybe
still,
but it will still be on the blockchain. So if there's another interface that can access this information, then your right will not be satisfied. But if the data is stored on the blockchain in a specific way, let's say it's hashed or is encrypted, and the other key can be just deleted. So even if you know that, yes, and I know that this is the data, this string of letters is the data, but I'm unable to access it.
So it can't be decrypted, as it were. It can't be unencrypted.
I mean, effectively, statistically, it's impossible to do it in reasonable time.
But then you've got this kind of clash where you've got know your customer and AML that really want you to associate an identity with your transactions, and then the tension between that and an individual's right to be forgotten is like.
That would that need to, though, really ideally be decided by a judge in a court case, which is kind of where we're at, isn't it? Because the only person that would actually be able to say, okay, yeah, we do need to see this data would be via a court case, and a judge saying, yeah, okay, we're going to scrap whatever rules and for whatever reason, and we do need to see this. Am I right?
It's a little bit more complicated, but it's all the way currently different blockchain projects are starting to address this issue, how to store personal data, how to use blockchain in a GDPR compliant way, without having the clarity from the case law or the regulator. Or what they do is they focus on how the data is being stored, right? The best option would be actually not to store the actual personal data on the blockchain. So you're keeping the personal data off chain, right, on a server, and then you just somehow create a hash pointer or a reference that is being stored on the blockchain, which means that you can still delete the personal data because it's off chain, and then the link will just lead to nothing.
Isn't that what Bitcoin was supposed to be? Firewalling identity from transactional data. Isn't that kind of how it was designed?
Yes, it could be used again. Like, could be used by per se. Bitcoin itself, the more it's being used, the more data you provide on how you're transacting. So it's all up to you as a user, as a data subject, to what extent you want to go when it comes to protecting your privacy, right? Remember, like, Bitcoin is just the technology. When used properly, you can protect your identity when used properly. And then, as I said, for example, if it is GDPR compliant if you store personal data in the way I just described. If you're not storing actually personal data on the chain, but it's just reference, and Bitcoin blockchain is used as a timestamp server, right? This is how it was called in the white paper. And then perfect. But then the other people may argue, is it really what we want when you think about blockchain, that, we still have to store something off chain? I don't know, right? It's all about the use case, all about the business case.
Yeah.
Maybe we do, yeah.
Maybe that's okay. Maybe we have to work out new ways of structuring data so that these things get separated when on creation, and that's just a new way of doing things. Yeah.
But it again brings me to this conclusion that, Bitcoin is not outside of the law. The law still applies. Bitcoin is just a technical feature, a mean of storing data, right? You still need to do it in compliance with the existing regulations. There are different ways, right, of doing this. One may be compliant, one incompliant, but it's all up to you as the person that decides on the use case.
And how do you think it's going to impact the crypto market? Just not like a broad, high-level view, because BSV gets that it has to operate within the law, but a lot of these cryptocurrencies don't. Do you think it's going to destroy them, or, in some way shut them down at some point?
I always try to refrain from commenting, on the crypto market and the price and everything. But it's on the other hand, I also understand this is something that's attractive to people. What I can tell, looking at the different blockchain projects and their market evaluation, when you think about, the tokens that are being traded, my first step in the assessment will be to look at the fundamentals, like what this project really does, and if there's any activity, if it's really efficient. Because when I think at the blockchain technology, I would focus on several factors, like how fast it is, if it can scale, if it's cheap, if it's secure. This would be the factors I would use for assessment of any protocol. And then I look at their pricing, and I see that there's, I don't know, maybe like 200, 300, 500 layer one protocols. Yeah, there's 10,000 or 20,000 different tokens, but I'm just focusing on layer one protocols, let's say, competing with BSV.
Yeah.
And their value actually is not driven by the activity and the fundamentals. Because I don't think, looking at, I don't know, Avalanche or Cardano, there is so much activity that could substantiate their current market value. The valuation. So my assumption is that basically the valuation is a result of the people's belief, right?
Yeah.
Hype is one thing, but the people's belief that this particular token will be used in this particular blockchain that will be massively adopted in the future. Because at this stage it's not adopted at all. Altogether, when you look at the adoption curve, with blockchain technology, you are very, very at the very beginning, let's say, right? Yeah. And then I look at BSV. I try to make it relative, and I see, well, the price is low, and then I see actual activity, but it's still undervalued in comparison to other coins. So I think a lot of people are actually buying different tokens that are native tokens of different layer one protocols, because they believe this particular one will get massively adopted, will be the one to rule them all. And it's impossible. Logically, it's impossible, right? And people are still buying Cardano and Tezos and others, and they have to keep them in portfolio, even though it's impossible that they all will win. I know it's diversification, right? You don't put all the eggs in one basket, but still. So I don't know how to answer your question. If BSV, what it is capable of, if it should destroy other blockchains, because the current market valuation of crypto markets is purely not driven by the fundamentals, by the technical capabilities.
Absolutely, it seems to be driven by market makers, exchanges, and hype. Yeah. So right, okay. It's difficult to say anything, with confidence about crypto. Go on, Didi.
I was going to say, from what you're saying, though, obviously, the big elephant in the room is the CBDCs, but these are literally all the things that the banks are going to have to look at to see whether or not, to be able to implement these things in the first place, aren't they? It's going to be a legal minefield for the banks to actually implement them. So,
with CBDCs, you have only a limited number of entities that will be able to issue them, and these are central banks. And central banks will not issue them just because a governor of the central banks wakes up in the morning and say, I'm going to issue CBDCs. There will be already a regulatory environment prepared in the jurisdiction that would allow for issuance of a CBDC as a legal tender, right? Equivalent of a fiat currency that is being used in the country or in an organization when you think about the EU. So I don't think it will raise legal concerns because there will be respective regulations being adopted beforehand. The question is obviously how regulations will be drafted and what they will what they will contain. But look, I don't know. I see the benefits of CBDCs, but I also see a lot of dangers they will bring. Right, massive surveillance, and even if we have some safeguards that these data will be used solely for the purpose of, let's say, the reasons that will be stipulated, these data will still be collected, processed, and analyzed, and it's in the end all about the trust. Living in China, I wouldn't trust the central bank, and I wouldn't trust the government, knowing that they anyway collect all the data about myself, about my life. Living in a country that is a country that with the rule of law, I would start to be concerned.
I was say Switzerland's not so bad, but I mean, like even in Canada recently, with the Canadian truckers, they reached into their bank accounts and stopped their bank accounts and stuff. And that would be my worry, is if we have CBDCs that are account based, they can just sort of switch you off effectively.
But, then the benefit of where I see the benefits. If we think of a developing country, let's take an example of Zimbabwe, right? A country that suffered from an extremely huge inflation in the past. And there is no trust established between the society and the central bank. People really don't trust the currency, even if it was devaluated and they said, okay, we had a new start, we're going to issue our new currency. There's no visibility on what actually the government and the central bank is doing. But if you put that currency and as a CBDC on the blockchain, public permissionless ledger, any manipulation, any printing machine going for like a week, basically a lot of new CBDCs, Zimbabwean dollars being issued, it will be immediately visible. People will see it. So in those jurisdictions, when there is no trust, or there's lack of trust, or insufficient trust, public permissionless blockchain, thanks to its auditability, they can provide advantages.
So this is going to open up a massive market for new kind of jobs, really, isn't it? With people like literally, I think Craig was saying something like there'll be kind of blockchain archaeologists and just people like just keeping that eye on what is actually happening at this point in time to make sure that, transparency and stuff, and that people are actually using the system within the law. So I see a lot of new kind of positions opening up to be able to do that kind of thing.
But these can be people, but this can also be, algorithms. Yes. So with the current amount of transactions, accumulated number of transactions in all the public permissionless blockchains, which is probably a tiny fraction of what will happen if you introduce a CBDC in a mid-sized country, right? All the transactions will be stored, right? So with all the numbers that we have right now, you already have this kind of entities that are providing the services. And these are blockchain analytics companies, right? Chain Analysis, CoinFirm, Merkle Science. These companies are like in real time are monitoring blockchains, right? Monitoring transactions in order to provide sufficient information for AML purposes and for KYC purposes to banks and crypto exchanges. So they can immediately see, okay, well, we have an incoming transaction that actually is involving or is coming from, I don't know, and 10 steps from a wallet that belongs to Hamas or Al-Qaeda, and they are trying to liquidate the proceeds from terrorism. And they can see it in real time, and they can say, okay, this is blacklisted. We are not allowing to do so. So we have these companies already. They're getting more and more sophisticated. They are building huge databases. But as you said, if I see an emergence of a whole new market, and instead of 5-6 companies globally, we'll have hundreds of thousands of these companies and algorithms analyzing transactions for very specific reasons, being kind of blockchain archaeologists seeking for specific data. And even like with BSV, right? If we know that BSV doesn't have a ceiling when it comes to scaling, and the blocks will get only bigger and bigger, in order to be capable of processing more and more transactions, and with a higher transaction throughput, the blockchain the blockchain itself will be growing so massively that there will be only a handful of entities that will be able to store it, right? And maybe
Google-sized entities, basically, yeah.
Exactly, right? So, and these entities will be maybe offering access to a particular transaction that took place 20 years ago, right? In the past, because you need to access it, and for a small fee and service, they'll allow you to. This is how they will monetize it, because this is an argument that we very often face from people that are not necessarily maybe hostile to us, but we introduce them to BSV, what it's capable of, and they say, okay, right, but if your blockchain is growing so massively, and you are talking about bringing in more and more transactions, who's going to be capable of storing the whole blockchain? I mean, if I store data right now, will I be able to access it in 5 years? And this is actually the incentive model for these types of entities, to keep this information, because they will be able to sell access to that information in the future.
And presumably specialize and break out into serving different markets and things like that. So, yeah.
This is fascinating stuff.
Well, it is. Like, I hadn't imagined that the conversation would be this broad, actually. It's really, really interesting.
I was just going to say, people who are interested in law and are interested in this topic and IP and KYC and everything, where can they go specifically to learn more about this? This is where we can drop in the Bitcoin Academy courses that are probably available. So would that be about right?
So Bitcoin Academy sadly does not have any courses that touch upon focus only about legal aspects of blockchain, but this is a good idea that we should think about, actually. There are several online courses that are available for free, provided by different good universities on platforms like Coursera and others, where one can find all information about legal aspects of blockchain. There are several reports issued by EU institutions, by some think tanks like EU Blockchain Observatory and Forum, or INADBA that we talked about earlier on. They produce reports, and one can also find a lot of information about that, about legal aspects of blockchain. I hope, and because I myself I teach sometimes in different universities when I'm invited to provide some guest lectures about blockchain and some of them about legal aspects of blockchains. So I hope this will become more kind of a compulsory part of every curriculum as the technology gets massively adopted. But just maybe to conclude, the way I usually start my lectures, because most my let's say default person that listens to my lecture usually associates blockchain with this very narrow use case of crypto, payments and trading, and I'm always saying, like, look, think about it, that this is just a means of storing data, nothing else. It's a ledger, and the way you use this ledger determines which law will be applicable. If you use it to store, healthcare data, you'll have all the data protection and healthcare regulations applicable. If you use it for payments, look at the payment, regulations, or like AML regulations and so on and so forth. If you're in supply chain, look at how regulations applicable to your field will apply to that. And this suddenly opens people's eyes, and that there is nothing so specific and so special in blockchain.
So we don't necessarily need new laws at all. We just need to observe the ones we've got.
With that, I'll be careful. Yeah, but in general, like there are two approaches. We have countries like Liechtenstein and Malta that are adopting like blockchain laws. You know, a clear new act that is going to regulate blockchain thoroughly. And there is another approach like Switzerland. What they did, it took them a year or two to properly analyze the regulatory framework. They consulted it with the industry, and they decided that, look, instead of introducing new law, we just looked at what we have, and we made 2 or 3 small changes, like cosmetic changes, that allow the industry to grow. One of them, for example, was some of the if you look at the token issued on the blockchain as a vehicle for financial instrument, for security. Mm-hmm. There's nothing more, right? I mean, so it's still a security, but it just uses blockchain as a mean of, as a vehicle. So the Swiss civil code, which is quite old, 100 years old, requires a written form for a transfer of a security. If I want to transfer a security from one party to another, it has to be certified in a written form. The question was obviously like, if it's done on a blockchain, is there a written form? And some commentators were saying that we need to interpret it very narrow. Written form is really like ink signature. The others were saying like, look, we are going more modern. If it's the written form can be also satisfied if this is like a digital ledger or a digital document. But in order just to cut these controversies and clarify the situation, the Swiss legislature decided to allow also a form of a DLT-based kind of a transfer. And it was just a little addition, but it clarified a lot. And it didn't require a whole new act to do so. So I think what we may need, all depends on the case, right? I'm not a specialist in all the laws, but from what I've seen, it very often requires just small additions, and not necessarily because the law is not keeping up with the technology, as many people say, but just to clarify the ambiguities and the vagueness of some of the regulations. So people are not afraid, oh, should I do this? And then I may not end up in the court. That is what I would expect.
Wonderful stuff.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you
for joining us and for all the education that you've just given us. Yeah. I will make sure that the links are in the description box below. So if people want to join the Discord channel, I'll put a link in there, and the links that you just said about where you can find some of the paperwork and the reports and everything as well. So really appreciate your time, Marcin.
That was, I feel like
eye-opening.
Thank you, Ruth.
To a degree now.
Pleasure.
Thanks so much, Marcin.
Thank you.